Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So to give the disclaimer, hi everyone, just as a disclaimer before we start, this workshop is being recorded. So if you are uncomfortable with audio or video in any way, feel free to turn it off or use the chat for any form of communication. The instructor will be able to answer any questions or concerns via the chat, or myself can facilitate them to the instructor during the chat. Yeah, and we are now recording. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Tristan, and I'm the Education and Studio Coordinator here at Interaxis. For those of you who are familiar with our space, Interaxis is a new media art space and gallery and production studio based in Toronto. We are dedicated to supporting emerging practices in new media art. I would like to open this by saying that our programming is committed to anti-oppression pedagogies and artistic practices. Interaxis stands in solidarity in the fight against white supremacy, systemic racism, anti-Blackness, and anti-Indigenous colonization. In our commitment to anti-oppressive work in the arts and beyond, it is urgent that we all unite to listen, understand, educate, and stand up against systemic and individualized acts of violence and discrimination. I would now like to take the time to acknowledge the land that Interaxis operates on, which has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a historical treaty between the First Nations, Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee people that bound them to share this territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We acknowledge this treaty, but we're also critical about the ways in which it has largely been breached by settlers and newcomers. In the state of affairs, we at Interaxis recommit to the network of renewed Indigenous sovereignty. This meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're both grateful and responsible for the opportunity to meet together, learn, and make art on this territory. I know we have some folks who are joining from elsewhere, who are maybe watching asynchronously from elsewhere, and we welcome you, and we encourage you to take this opportunity to reflect and share in regards to the history of your own personal geographies. And I like to share this map by native land at this moment for those who are tuning in from other spaces to kind of just take a look at the territories and treaties that are over the space that is where you currently preside. And because this workshop is happening digitally, we encourage everyone from around the world to take this time. I'd now like to introduce our instructor for this workshop. Casey Koyczan is a Tlicho Dene interdisciplinary artist from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. They use various mediums to communicate how culture and technology can grow together in order for us to develop a better understanding of who we are, where we come from, and what we will be in the future. He creates whatever tools necessary to bring an idea to fruition and works mostly in sculpture, installation, 3D modeling, VR, 360, experimentation, filmmaking, and audio work such as music, soundscapes, and film scores. He is an international artist that has practiced in many residencies, exhibitions, festivals, and collaborations in parts of the world such as Finland, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, the Netherlands, and the UK. He's also a musician, producer, filmmaker, actor, narrator, and advocate for future generations of artists and musicians. He has a multimedia production diploma from Lethbridge College, a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Thompson River University, and a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Manitoba. And so without further delay, I would like to introduce Casey, who will be holding our Creating with Tiltbrush workshop today. And I'll hand over the mic to you, Casey. Feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tristan. Appreciate it. So welcome. This workshop will be covering a few different steps within the program Tiltbrush. I'll also be mentioning some other offshoots of that software as Tiltbrush went open source quite some time ago. So there's been other versions of Tiltbrush created, one of them which is free, which is important to, everyone on a budget, all artists of different types. The workshop will cover an introduction to the workspace and the tools, kind of how to use them, the difference between static and animated brushes, because Tiltbrush has some animated brushes, some sort of like fire or embers where there's some movement involved with them, whereas other brushes are just like a mark. We'll be covering lighting, environments. There's a few different like sort of environments that you could work in within Tiltbrush. Some guides, then we'll go through creating some basic shapes and then kind of building up those shapes a bit more to create more complex shapes and objects. And I'll be covering grouping, how to group various shapes and marks together, coloring and recoloring, and a few different tricks for optimizing your creation, or just some considerations to have in mind while you're creating or when it comes to wanting to export your project. And then the final version will be exporting. It's been a bit tricky over the last couple of years since Google removed their Poly sort of database, which was linked closely to Tiltbrush. For instance, when you'd finish a creation, you would have had the ability to upload it to Poly, which was this online database, and everyone can kind of see it. People were able to access it through their headsets, but now things have kind of changed a little bit. So it's a little bit more of a workaround to get your creations exported, but it still is possible by way of connecting your headset to your computer or emailing images to yourself, that sort of thing. One of the first things I'm going to cover, I'm just going to share my screen here. So within your headset, you'll, depending on what headset you have, you'll be accessing Tiltbrush to purchase it through the headset itself. But this just gives you an idea as to where it is online as well. So it's available on Steam. It's also available on the Oculus store. So it does have a price. It sort of varies all the time. It's free sometimes, and sometimes you have to pay for it. I think it depends if you get a new headset as well. Sometimes it'll just grant you rights to the software and a couple other pieces of software. But this gives you an idea as to what VR headsets are supported within with Tiltbrush. So it gives you an idea as to where it is online. But to mention the other versions of Tiltbrush, so there was because Tiltbrush went open source quite some time ago, which means they basically released their code to the public. And as soon as they did that, a bunch of different versions of Tiltbrush started to pop up. People started to create new brushes for their for Tiltbrush and code them into their working version, their experimental version. So a couple of versions have a lot more brushes and sort of different tools implemented within their versions. The one I'm going to show you is called OpenBrush, and this is pretty much a one-to-one comparison or revision of Tiltbrush, except they're really just pushing the open source code. It's basically exactly like Tiltbrush in every way, except it's free, which is really cool. So just a little bit about OpenBrush. It's a derivative made from the open source code of Tiltbrush. And they just give their thank yous and really just mention that this came from Tiltbrush. We're not, plagiarizing or affecting any sort of copyright. Gives you an example of what you could do with it. And so this is also available on the Quest headset. When you go to look for this within the store, there's a experimental sort of thing. This warning will come up within your headset as well. It's just letting you know it's through the App Lab, which is sort of like an experimental platform for the Quest 2 or MetaQuest, whatever you want to call it. So just be sure that when you're looking for this within the headset, there'll be a pull down tab for the experimental App Lab section. You'll just have to increase that, drop that down, and then there'll be a get button or install button, and it'll be for free. So these are the headsets that OpenQuest is is supported on. So I don't believe the Vive or any other headset is supported at this time. That may change in the future. There's another version called Multi-Brush, which is another revised version of Tilt Brush, but it's like a multiplayer version of Tilt Brush where you could have numerous people within like a hosted room, which it would have been really cool to host this workshop within Multi-Brush, but that version is a paid version as well. I think it's paid because of maybe some of the new sort of programming and technology they had to implement within it in order for it to be multiplayer. But those are just a couple different versions of Tilt Brush itself and how it works. So without further ado, I'm gonna link up my AirLink with my Quest 2. I'm going to be using a Quest 2 for this workshop. And I'll be using AirLink, which basically connects the Quest 2 with my desktop computer, and that enables me to stream it live. So everything will look relatively the same within Tilt Brush, although the platform to get there is just slightly different. And there'll be intermittent breaks, probably, I think, so we're going for 3 hours. So we'll just take like 5-10 minutes every now and then, or whenever we see fit, because I'll be doing a lot of talking. So as a heads up, this is what I call a face napkin. It's like a face cover. It's good if anyone wears makeup and they don't want to get it on the foam sort of covering of the headset there. It's also good for, you know, sweat if you're in the headset for quite some time, or if you share your headset avidly, if you have, you know, a partner or roommate, or if you're in some sort of collab and you're constantly sharing a headset, these things are good to have. You can get like a pack of 100 of them on Amazon for something like $35. I'm just going to boot this up. I think we're good. All right. So because there's a little bit of lag, or because the movements on the screen are different from what I'm seeing in my headset, I'm going to try and keep my actions quite slow, and I'll try not to move my head too fast, because then it can jump the screen around quite a bit. So when you first open Tilt Brush, or in the other versions, they have this sort of like splash screen that gives you sort of like an overview as to what it looks like, what a lot of the different brushes look like, you know, how they use them, a bit of a character there. So it's a really nice sort of environment just to see like how it could be used. Right away, depending on what hand you are, it'll show you basically how to interact with the menu system and that sort of thing. So point to interact, and then to click on anything, you just hold down the trigger. So these are a bunch of different featured sketches that automatically appear here. Some people are super talented within this program, and I've avidly gone through these at points just to see how other people are working with it. It's one thing to see what people can do with Tilt Brush on like a computer screen or on your phone, but it's so much different when you're actually in a headset and seeing other people's works. The amount of realism that people can get with it is amazing. I still haven't gotten to that point. But just a lot of these ideas are just fascinating, and it's very, very inspiring. So I definitely recommend checking all of these out. But to jump right in, I'm going to show the work that was featured within the promotion for the workshop, and it was a piece that I did that was inspired by. It was one of the first pieces that I made within Tilt Brush. I think it was like my second or third sort of creation, just when I was still getting used to it, and I really wanted to make a bird. So I started to make this phoenix sort of head, like this bird head, and it started to look like a phoenix. But then, I started to make tentacles and stuff, and it was like kind of like a kraken. So I made it like a phoenix kraken. So what happens when you load up a sketch that you've done, I'll just click this. So when you load up a sketch, it's going to start to build it. And show all of the marks and how, like, the time that I put them in, and it just sort of follows the timeline of the piece itself and how it was created. So this just gives you a bit of an idea as to the process of how I created this piece. It might be a little dark right now, but everything will brighten up quite soon. So you can see I'm putting in the eyes. I kind of have a glowing eyes aesthetic. I can't really get away from it, but I just really enjoy it. So working up the eyes here in addition to the head and sort of the wings slash tentacles coming off of it. If you wanted to, you could just hold down the left trigger and it'll quick load the piece. But just for the sake of showing you how this was done, I'm just going to let it quick load. So I'm putting in this kind of like smoky glowing orb in front of the figure here. And then soon it'll show putting smoke around the entire object to give more of an immersive kind of feeling. So that was when I was putting in all of the smoke in the background. And I wasn't using the mirror tool at this point, so I could have saved myself some time, but I was at the time I was still getting used to the software and everything that it can do. So that's building it up a little bit more. And then that's putting in some of the embers to activate the background and put in some movement. Put a little bit of embers around the orb there. And I think it's almost done. I'm putting in more smoke around the back. It's still loading. Some more pieces in the back there. Okay. So this is the work totally loaded. When it's done, a little message will pop up there like that. So to move around the piece, what I'm doing is I'm pressing in both of the middle buttons here on the middle of the controllers, and it's enabling me to rotate the work as well as increase and decrease the size by while I'm holding the middle buttons. Moving the controllers further apart to human scale or low. It gives like a brontosaurus sort of image to kind of say that you're as big as a brontosaurus. So that's kind of how you navigate around, and you can move, while you're holding them down, you can move the controllers and it'll move you around the digital space. So you can get an idea as to what the figure is seeing. But I'm going to zoom right out and kind of move outside of the space that I created to give you an idea as to what it looks like from a distance, maybe a bit of a different vantage point. So when I created this and when I did the recording of the video, you're actually set right in there. But this just gives you an idea as to what an immersive sort of landscape or creation can kind of look like, because it's basically covering 360 degrees in all different directions like that, so that when you're inside of it, it's like a totally immersive sort of experience. So I just want to jump right in and show you something that I made, but also how it was made. I'm going to show you one of the tools right now, just to give you an idea. It's called the dropper tool. It's accessible by this little button here, or else within your tool menu system here, it's available there as well. I'll go through all of these tools and everything soon. I just want to show you this first. So when you have this and you put it onto a brush, it's going to say smoke, right? If you move it over here, say embers. And what you can do is if you want to use that, say I want to make more smoke, you can just press that and take a drop from it. It's basically like a little sampler. Then you can go ahead and hold down the trigger and start to make your own smoke like that. So it's good if you're creating something, but you forget what kind of brush you used. You could just go use the dropper and say like, oh, that's you know, a tapered flat brush, tapered flat as well. Oh no, my AirLink lost connection, sorry. Reconnect here. We're back, awesome. Okay. Yeah, so it's a good tool for just sampling and being able to remember basically what you're using for different pieces. I'm going to load up another sketch here just to give you another example, and following with the bird theme. This is one of my more popular pieces. It was one of the very first. It was I think it was the third or fourth creation that I made, because I made this after the Phoenix Kraken, the one that I just showed you, because I wanted to do a lot more of a detailed version of a bird. So I put in some reference photos of ravens from the Northwest Territories. So this bird is like a direct reference or inspiration from some of the local ravens that we have where I come from. So this gives you kind of the process as well with the smoky eyes. And I made this at a bit of a different scale as well. I think it's more zoomed in, so the smoke will have a little bit more movement the closer you're zoomed into it. Just a bit of a trick for how to really highlight some of the movement in animated brushes. So it just shows you how it's being worked up. And I want to show you this because it's kind of, it reminds me of layering up a painting. I'm not a painter, but when I did try it out within art school and stuff like that, when I learned exactly how painting was done and that whole layering process, it really informed how I sort of create in tilt brush. Reminiscent of let's say a sculpture or something like that as well. You're kind of always building up something, and in how you create it. And the trick is just knowing when to stop or when to keep on building something up before what you contribute tends to start to ruin it. So that's a lesson that I was learned in art school. So kind of applying that to a lot of different works that I do. So this just shows you the development of the raven itself, definitely accentuated, you know, and not exactly how our ravens look like, obviously, but just giving myself some freedom with it. So this creation, basically what I did is I created just this itself, and then I started to build up these giant heads in the sky. But basically what I did is I just copied like a good chunk of this with the selection tool and just duplicated it up there. So I'm just going to quick load this. And this is the result of the Raven Gods piece. So after putting all this in, made 5 duplications of this piece, or the head here with the selection tool, accessible by the quick menu here, or within the tools there as well. So basically what I did is just kind of highlighted all of this area here, and then made a duplicate of it. So when it's highlighted, all that's highlighted. I think it highlighted the smoke as well, so I'm not going to duplicate it. But there's that little stack of paper on the controller there on the button. I'm just putting my thumb on top of it, but not pressing it down. When you press that in and hold it, it's going to make a duplicate of what you just selected. And then to deselect, you just pull the trigger down, the front trigger twice, and it'll deselect. So this is another example of sort of how to create. With this piece, I really wanted to push scale and have that be more of a thing at the forefront for a creation, like have something that I worked really meticulously on in regards to detail. But when you're looking at this detail this closely, that there's something else that's like massive above you, right? So that's kind of just how I wanted to play with scale, both of the subject here, the things in the sky, and how the person reacts to it within a headset. There's a version of this on my YouTube channel, but being in headset is definitely a lot more engaging. And so I was thinking about doing an artist talk, but what I figured was best is just to bring you through some of the pieces that I've created in VR. Like as Tristan mentioned with my intro, you know, I do a lot of different artworks, that sort of thing. But because this is very VR specific, then I'll kind of just stick with that. This is a sort of a bison blocking a giant highway creation that I did. I'm just going to quick load this. So there's a snow brush that that Tilt Brush has, and that's what I used for the snow there. I just put it above and just had this giant bison blocking the road, and I made it quite, you know, dark to kind of give this sort of massive dooming sort of feel for the bison itself. But just to show you a bit more detail of this, I'm going to use the light, and right now it has both the sun and the moon basically like backlit underneath the subject. So automatically this is your center of your space here where it's referencing with the circle, and then you move the sun or the moon around and it'll correspond to where it is. So I'll just put it right there so you can see the marks a bit more, and I'll move the moon too so you can see that it's a little bit brighter. Okay, yeah, so this you can see it a lot better now. So if I just took the dropper tool, then I'll be able to see this is a pinched flat marker. I was using a light for the eyeball, a matte hull for the horns, and it looks like the rest is pretty much just pinched marker at subtle variations of color for the fur and stuff like that. A paper sort of brush for the roads, some smoke all around. So yeah, that's a bison blocking a highway. It's something that happens a lot in the Northwest Territories. So I wanted to kind of like reflect that in a VR work as well. To get rid of menus and stuff like that, this will take a little bit of getting used to, but it's kind of fun. So you kind of just throw it like a frisbee, and while you're getting to that point, you let go of the middle trigger that you're holding. So when you highlight something, you hold down the middle trigger and you can basically grab it. But to delete this or just get rid of it, you basically throw it like a frisbee and let go of the middle trigger at the same time. So gone. It's kind of fun. I'll show you another creation here. This one might take a little bit to load, but okay. So this is a work that I did for the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth in Calgary. And it was my first commissioned VR artwork. So it was for an event that they had. And it was one of the last pieces that I made in Tilt Brush. where I was again pushing scale, and it's communicating like an adult teaching a youth, techniques of dancing. So they're two fancy dancers basically with their shawls and stuff like that. And what I did for this piece was I took some vector images that I just downloaded from the internet, like feathers and a little bit of beadwork and Yusei's logo and stuff, and I imported them into the project file. Unfortunately, they're not loaded into this this headset because I created this on a different headset a couple of years ago. So that's what all these question marks are. These were kind of vector-based transparent PNGs. So just to give you an idea, is that something that you're able to do? You can, draw something or paint something or something that you created within Photoshop or any other graphic design. And if it has transparency to it, let's say a PNG with transparent background, you can import them into Tilt Brush and that transparency is going to come through. So this was the first work that I did where I imported some of those images. And it's another way of just working. I thought about importing a bunch of them and really not using any brushes within Tilt Brush itself, but just using those images to create works. Anyways, so there's a lot going on within this creation, using a lot of different brushes. I definitely took my time with it. And it was kind of one of the first times that I was doing basic human figures as well, because I do a lot of animal inspired things, but not too many humans. So I just wanted something basic. I didn't want to go too detailed within the face, but definitely accentuate a lot more of the regalia. I had a lot of fun making the moccasins. So there was beadwork here. I really should have loaded these up to give you a better idea. There's some feathers here and that sort of thing. Use a different brush for the skirt. And then the youth there just went with a different color scheme. The powwow grounds itself was inspired by the Kamloopa powwow grounds in Kamloops. I spent a lot of time there doing my bachelor's degree, and I went to a powwow there, and it was amazing. And then a grass brush, it's literally called like grass or spittle, I think, or something like that. But it makes a really good grass sort of texture, not perfect, but you can see that it's able to layer up a little bit. So it gives you a bit of dimension. And then basically what I did is after I created this was the first sort of subject here. And I selected everything and duplicated it and shrunk it down and then changed all the color for the youth. So it's basically a replica of that. And then the piece itself is called With the Ancestors. So I duplicated this figure again and put a version up in the sky to kind of like communicate an ancestor that's passed away, but they're still watching over us and helping us throughout our lives, that sort of thing. So I made basically some wings as well for this figure, just to give you an idea as to how that looks, and then how it looks from their perspective, looking down. So another sort of test in scale and how that works. And then some of the atmospherics of, the embers and the smoke trails and that sort of thing. And some of the other pieces might take a little while to load. This was an older version of this piece that I created that was from a dream. I since sort of redid this piece to have 5 wolves because it was a dream that I had one time when I was at my mom's cabin. So it just gives you different ideas to examples of mark making, sort of how to build something up. And different sort of forms of inspiration. Okay, so let's go right to the basics now. So I'm going to go clear sketch. So when you create something in Tilt Brush, you save it by pressing the floppy disk here to save. and it'll give you the option to overwrite, that sort of thing. So just make sure it saved it, and it'll save it to your library. But if you're ever creating something and you want to make another sketch, you just go clear sketch and go, okay, this isn't going to delete your creation because you already saved it. It's basically just another way of starting over or starting a new sketch. And right now, because the environment that we were in for that wolf was in space, I'm going to go to the environments and just change it back to standard. So when you first get into Tilt Brush, this is what it's going to look like. This is the standard sort of environment. You're on this like you're on this sort of platform out in like the middle of nowhere. There's, hills and stuff in the background. And immediately, what is going to be in your hand is this like blue light. It's the default color, it's the default brush that it gives you. And really, like, just use that. If you've never used it before, take your time and just play with it and be amazed by it. Because the first time that I opened Tilt Brush, this is what I did for like 10 minutes. I thought it was amazing. So I just started to go off and do all sorts of shapes and colors and stuff. And then what I did was I went to the color palette and just started selecting different sort of colors. So what I'm doing, I'm just hovering over the selector and holding down the trigger in the front there to select. And I just went to different colors and just allow yourself to be kind of wowed by that, because it's definitely a fun experience, like seeing it for the first time and how the marks and the colors sort of engage with each other, that sort of thing. And a really quick brief overview of the tools, or I'll just cover all the tools now. But say you made something and you basically just want to delete it. There's a couple ways to do that. On your left trigger, can't really see because the tools are there. There's a undo button right there, the bottom button on your left trigger. So when you press that, it'll undo what you just did, and so on, and that sort of thing. There's also a redo button, so you could bring that back. And you can use the erase button. One thing to keep in mind about Tilt Brush is that when you go to erase something, say all of the red right now was one continuous mark, right? So all of these are linked together. So when I go to erase this, for instance, if I go to erase it here, it's not just going to erase this section of the mark, it's going to erase the whole thing. That's just kind of how Tilt Brush works and how it acts. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like if you're holding down the trigger for an entire mark and you go to erase it, then it's gonna erase everything like that. And that's just the way it's programmed. It would be great if you could just erase a little mark of it, but that's just not how it's programmed. So just something to keep in mind for the future. So that's one way to erase something. You can also erase these. But another way, and kind of a fun way too, is doing the Frisbee method. So you go to your selection here, selection tool, and you just hold this thing down and press it to a mark. So now it's just selecting this one thing, and when you hover over it, there'll be a little vibration in your controller letting you know that you're connecting with it. So then you can press down the middle button there, and you can grab it. So with the selection tool, when you have something grabbed, you can also hold down the other middle button on your left controller, and now you'll be able to scale this sort of mark. You can make it huge if you want, let go of it. Now you have this gigantic red mark. I'm just going to select it again and scale it down. But as I mentioned, another way of just deleting something is just holding it, like selecting it, grabbing it, and tossing it like a Frisbee. So it's sort of fun. Like if you don't want to erase everything that you made, but you want to erase some things, it's a good way of just, or it's a fun way of just grabbing something and deleting parts of whatever. So yeah, that's like the selection tool in a nutshell there. And I covered the dropper right at the beginning, but just as another refresher, it shows you exactly what you were using. And it'll also, when you press it, it'll give you that brush, but it'll also give you that color. So the brush and the color correspond with each other as to how the dropper works. But say if you wanted to change this, say if you did a bunch of different marks and you wanted to change this blue to a red or something, you press the recolor button, let's go to red, and then now when I have this held down, it's going to sort of activate that, and anything that this presses, it's going to change it to that color. So it's a really convenient way of changing colors for something. Also, if you built something up that's all the same color with a bunch of different marks, but you just wanted to change the color for some things, this is a really effective way as well. So that gives you an idea as to how the recolor works. Cameras is an interesting one on the untethered headset. I think you're only going to be able to take snapshots and GIFs. I'm not sure if the video is capable, but it's a really good way to just show your work. If you've made something, you can take a snapshot of it, it'll save to your headset, and then you can email it to yourself. The file sizes are very small within Tilt Brush. Like even the video, if you do use AirLink or a link cable or something like that, and you can use the video, I definitely recommend it. The smoothing the image stabilization is really good, the smoothing, that sort of thing, and file sizes are very small as well. So just something to keep in mind. They have a teleport option. I don't really use this too much. I mostly just move around by scaling the environment and that sort of thing, but you can do the teleport if you wanted to, just teleport to different sort of locations around your creation, if you want to get a good idea as to how it looks like from a distance, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's kind of disorienting for me, so I don't really use it, but just to give you an idea as to how teleport works. This is the selection tool again, and there's some other sort of options within the selection. So we'll just go over these briefly here. So, all right, so if I select this thing, the selection tool, so it's selected, I can grab it, I can scale it, I can delete it by throwing it like a Frisbee. But another thing, as I mentioned at the beginning there, if you hover over this while it's selected, there's that little copy, that stack of paper there. So I'm going to hold that down, and it's going to create a duplicate of that shape. So that's one way of duplicating something. If you have a really nice mark that you want to use again and it's kind of hard to do it again, you can just duplicate it. So this is a copy of that. And one thing that I can do is the first sub option for the selection is the group selection. So I'm going to select both of these and press group selection. It's going to say grouped. So now when I just go to select one of these, it's going to select both of them. It's going to put them in a group like that. So even though Tilt Brush itself doesn't have like a layer system, like layer hierarchy, it was really cool that they put in this selection to somewhat keep things together if you wanted to. Let's say different body parts or different objects. If you want them grouped together, that's the way you do it. And as well, if I was to delete these, they'll both delete at the same time too. But for now, I'm going to ungroup the selection. So when it goes back, when I go to select one, it's just going to select one. but if I wanted to make, if I'm not using the mirror option and I go to select one, you can flip the selection too. So it's just going to flip it. It'll make like an exact mirrored copy of your selection there. You can press select all, and it's going to select everything within your space. Say if you wanted to move something or scale something, that's a really easy way of creating scale as well. You can create something in a very small, intricate sort of space in VR, and then press select all and just scale it up like crazy. It's a lot of fun just to see how much you can push that, as well as inverting the selection. You can select this and then select everything else except what you selected at the beginning. Yeah, so that gives you an idea of the selection tool. One of my favorites is the mirror tool. So when you press that, it's going to create it right within your space. So for now, I'm going to get rid of both of these. Okay, I'm going to go back to my brush. Okay, so what it's doing is it's created this mirrored, like this mirror for the brush itself. So you can go through and start to experiment with this. It's going to give you automatic symmetry. And as you can see, it doesn't matter what side of the mirror you're on. I use this a lot, mostly with, you know, for character creation, that sort of thing. It makes it really easy to have everything synced up like that. You can also move this if you want. However, the easing, like Tilt Brush is very specific to your hand gestures and stuff. Like you can give it these you can sort of lock it in different areas by holding down this button on the right controller. So this little lock, so it's going to like lock itself to specific sort of angles and that sort of thing, while still staying vertically locked. But that's just something to keep in mind, how the mirror system works. And when you go to delete things, it's only going to grab one side of the creation, if it's not, like, you know, all connected. But yeah, mirror is a lot of fun. I definitely recommend this because it could save you a lot of time rather than creating, you know, a whole thing. You only really have to do one side of it, say a head or creation or arms or anything really. So I do use this quite a bit. We'll just hide that for now. And the straight edge tool is really cool because it gives you straight lines. I know with Tilt Brush how it's really specific to your hand and that sort of thing. Without the straight edge to do this, it might be kind of difficult. Like, you know, you won't be able to get like as much of a straight edge as you would as if you're using the straight edge tool. So it gives you an idea as to kind of how that works. If you want to do a lot of like really specific lines and that sort of thing, that's definitely the tool to use. So those are the immediate tools. On the controller itself, so you can increase and decrease the brush tip by using the analog stick here on your right controller. So with it, your brush tip all the way to the left, it's going to give the smallest brush tip. And then let's move it all the way to the right, and it's going to give a really big brush tip. So that's how your brush tip works, and how to increase and decrease the size. Also on the left controller, there'll be this button here, and when you hold it down, that gives you this quick menu. So these tools correspond to the tools that are on your palette here, but it's just a quick sort of menu for you, so you don't have to always reference your tool panel. So it has your dropper, the recolor, the erase, your brush, which you're on right now, your selector, and then this is like a model pin. This is basically how to lock something on within your space. So if you don't want to be able to select it or move it or anything like that, you just mark it with this pin and it's going to lock into place. I'll just show you an example of that right now. Let's go to a different brush. I'm going to cover all these brushes in detail, but just to give you an idea, I'm just going to build like a cube sort of thing, just a roughed in cube. Okay. So right now I'm able to select this cube and kind of move it anywhere I'd like. But if I didn't want to be able to move it, you just use the pen and let me do that again. I have to select it first. Okay. Oh, for whatever reason it's not working right now. Maybe I'm doing something incorrectly, but I really don't use it too much. So anyways, I'll move on. So in theory, the pin is how to lock something to your scene. We'll just have to experiment with that to totally figure it out. And so with the next menu here, the environment. So everyone's different. Everyone creates in different sort of spaces, wherever they're comfortable, that sort of thing. Generally, this is how I start in this environment, but it's mostly just because it's the default, you know. But if you prefer something else, you can click on the environments, and this is going to give you the standard. But let's check some of these other ones out. So this is night sky, and it's basically the same thing, but now it's more of a night sort of version, and you have some faraway galaxies and stars. It's like a nice sort of relaxing environment. You have space, the one where the wolf was in, and it gives you an entire, it's like you're floating in space, like an entire sort of like look around the stars. But a cool thing that does is it puts this planet, this like moon-like thing right in front of you. So it's kind of interesting to go into this and sort of create this accentuations of like this planet. I don't know, gives you something to play with. So it's an interesting environment to use just in that regard. It also gives you a dress form, so you can go in and, you know, if you're into fashion or something, you can start to make sort of versions of dresses or any sort of like clothing. I think it's kind of an interesting sort of implementation into the software. I haven't used this too much at all, but it is something interesting. It kind of gives you a different way of working in Tilt Brush and gives an idea as to what else it can do. Unfortunately, when you export in this version, I don't think it exports the mannequin. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then you have a pedestal where you can make, if you're more into like pottery or something, it gives you like this platform for what you're making. It kind of, it makes it a little bit easier in regards to scale, how big something is, because an idea is to like how it would sit on a plinth or something. Yeah, I don't really use this one too much, but it is interesting because it gives you an automatic sort of shadow for a lot of your creations in response to where the light is and that sort of thing. And also, like when you make something but you change the environment, then what you've created stays with it. So I think this is going to be covered, but snowman, that's kind of a thing you can dress up, you know, your snowman, do whatever. It's kind of hiding what I created there, but this is another environment. I don't really use it too much at all, but it's there. And then you have some like more stylized just colors. So the pink lemonade is going to create like really sort of like not muted colors, but it's going to treat the light and everything a bit differently. These three environments kind of do that. So with the pistachio, this is going to accent the light a little bit differently. It's going to give this warm kind of a tone to your environment. Illustrative is really cool. It's like a black and white, black, white, and red. It looks really good within this environment. With some of these different brushes, we'll just go to basic brush, pinched flat. Let's do some red. And then some darks. I just hit my keyboard. Still good, cool. So yeah, I really enjoy this color scheme within this environment specifically. It's a lot of fun. And then you have just a black. So it's a solid black. The black that I use really, it really blends in with the background. You can't even really see it. So that's a way of doing some like masking as well. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're using the exact color of what your background is, it's an interesting way to create some illusions and that kind of thing. And then you have a white room, totally white, sort of like the illustrative, but you're able to see the shadows and stuff a lot more just in the white surrounding. And then you have blue, just another version of that sort of stuff. So let's go back to the standard landscape. This is what your creation looks like so far. And then to give a little bit of a recap of the light. So this is the default location of both the sun and the moon. So the sun is going to be the brightest light, obviously, and you can, you know, how it corresponds to where your object is. So right there, it's like directly above it, whereas you could put it more on the horizon. You're going to get these really long, stretched out shadows, and that sort of thing. So it depends on where you want your object to be lit from. And then the moon is more of like the ambient light. And usually by default, the secondary light is kind of lower. So let's increase that a little bit. Yeah, so you see kind of how the moonlight works. If I take the regular light right down, this will show you how the moonlight works a little bit more. So it's a lot more of a softer light. It doesn't really emit the shadows too much, but it is there. So we'll adjust these again. Okay. And frisbee this right out of there. Some lights. And then you can tweak your backdrop sort of how you would like. So right now the default landscape, it is quite bland, you know, it's very gray and that sort of stuff. So let's just make the sky a little brighter. You could change it to whatever color you want, you know. Let's just make it blue. Change kind of the horizon to sort of red. Looks kind of cool, a little bit more uplifting. And then the fog for the distance, you can see in the back, you increase the fog all the way, and it's really gonna lose a lot of detail for the hills and stuff. So it's just another thing that you can do. It really depends on your comfort and that sort of thing. And for the mountains in the distance, you can kind of adjust these too. So change it to any sort of surroundings or landscape you want, whatever helps you create and whatever helps you focus on what you're working on. Yeah, it's a little bit of a blue tinge. So that's how you can adjust your backdrop there. Okay, so guides. These are like some essential building blocks for people. Everyone has different sort of approaches to how they create, drawings or sculptures or whatever. I know that when a lot of people that create figures with pencil and pen or like drawing, they'll use like spheres and ovals and stuff to build up a character. So the same sort of thing applies within this environment as well. You have a sphere guide, a cube guide, an ellipsoid guide, and a capsule guide, just like a little pill looking sort of thing. So when you click this, it's going to automatically give you your sphere guide, and you could reach out and grab this thing when you have it selected. There'll be a little vibration right there showing you that you can grab it. So you can put this anywhere, but you can also scale this. And each of them are going to scale differently because a sphere doesn't have any sort of corners. It's just going to get larger and smaller. But how this works is you'll see that your cursor like locks to the surface of this sphere. And because it's a guide, that's what it's meant to do. So when you're holding this down and you start to create, it's gonna just lock to the surface of the sphere like that. So all the way around. So if I did that, I left a couple of the sides open, and you go to select your sphere again, you can grab it, pull it away, and then there you have this, the influence of the sphere on your marks. And if you want, like, this is how I created the eyeballs for the birds that I was making. I had the sphere and I used smoke as the brush, and I just went around it. So I'll actually do that here. I'll make this a little smaller. Let's say that big, maybe a little bit smaller. Okay. And then we'll go to smoke here. I'll give an overview of the brushes in its entirety, but for the sake, I'm still kind of like working with showing you guys the tools. So I'll zoom in a bit more and make this a lot smaller. Lock this to here, and I'm just going to go crazy, going all around it, making sure I have all of the edges covered, or for the majority anyway. Smoke generally covers a lot of area, so you can put your head right into the surface there. Okay, and move away the sphere. What I'm going to do is go to my selection and just select this. I'll put it inside here. Kind of looks like a interesting kind of eyeball, I think, in some sorts or whatever. But that's just how you use the sphere guide. And then for the cube guide, it's a little different, but the concept stays the same. Just gonna move this over here. So I'm just going to check to make sure I'm still in front of the camera. Okay, I was a little off. So for the cube guide, so the cube has a bunch of different corners. And when you go to scale this now, it depends on the orientation of the cube. So right now, I don't know if you can totally see it, but the left and the right side of the cube are highlighted. So that means that if I went to go scale this up by holding down the middle button on the left trigger as well, and I stretch these apart, it's going to scale those two sides. You can't really like make the cube like scale all uniformly for whatever reason. But in order to get around that, to scale that, you just flip it up on its side like that, and now these two sides are going to scale out. So I'll make it that big, and then you turn it, so now those two sides are able to scale out. So it's kind of a roundabout way to making like a much bigger cube, but that's just kind of how it operates. And with this, now when I go to put something on this, let's say we'll go back to the other brush. It's going to lock to each of these faces. So if I go, let's say for the top, if I put it on the top face here, come on now. So it's only going to stick to the top. I can go anywhere within the top that I want, but it's not going to go over the edge. I tip it a lot lower. So if I go to the side and I start to draw in here, it's only going to stick to the side as long as I have that trigger held down. It's not going to go anywhere other than that face. And make this a little bit higher. So it gives you an idea as to different sizes of the marks and how they correspond to the different edges. Okay, so if I go and take that guide out, then you can see kind of how that looks in response to the faces of the guide and how the different sizes of the brush tip look like on different sides. So that's the sphere and cube guide, and the ellipsoid and capsule are basically like sort of the same. The ellipsoid is basically just like the sphere in how it scales up and stuff. Although the capsule is a bit different. When you hold it like this, it's gonna scale the ends. This is still tricky. Yeah, it does the ends. And then if you hold it up like that, I think it still does the ends. Yeah. They can be kind of tricky sometimes. I think it matters where you're grabbing them and that sort of thing too, and how they scale. But I don't really use this one too much, but it is another guide that's available there. So I'll move this over to the side for now. This guy. Let's get a little collage happening here, I guess. Okay. So that's the guides. And so Poly Library is discontinued. I'm not sure why they still have it here, but that is, it used to be an option. Camera paths, this is kind of cool because you can create a path for your camera to fly around in within your space. So if you hold down a point, and it's kind of like the pen tool within Illustrator and that sort of thing. You just keep on adding these points. If you want them to be curved, you just hold the trigger down and press it and release it. You have to watch out though, because when you use this, the frame rate will go really quickly. So when they implemented this, a bunch of people were posting their creations and stuff. And okay, so I'm done adding anchor points. So if you preview it, oh, it's actually pretty good. So it'll show you in real time, like where the path is. That's great. It's going really slow. Yeah, so right there, I did how it travels, but I didn't add the direction points for the camera. So it's only staying at one sort of point, right? And then you can scrub through if you want. You can also pause it and scrub through as well. So it gives you an idea as to how exactly to show it. I'm going to add a direction point for this. So you just hold it with the middle or with the middle button there and just tilt the camera. So at the beginning here, I'm going to add this direction point. It's looking there. So now, oop, I have that in. Okay. Now go through. Okay. All right. So now, because I added those camera direction points as well, it's going to correspond to those. So it'll compensate for where this camera is pointing as well. And you can give yourself a good kind of fly through. So you can either do this by hand. As I mentioned, the camera option within the linked version, if you're using AirLink or the camera or the cable on the Quest, then all the video options will be available to you. When you're not tethered, the camera abilities are a little less accessible. I'm not even sure if Camera Paths is in just the wireless version, but just for the sake of covering everything, this is kind of what it looks like. So I'll just delete that path and move on to the different thing. So that's basically your tools in a nutshell there. And I've gone through the color picker. And one of the best things about this program is that there's so many different brushes. Just within the default version that you have all of these different kinds of brushes that correspond to different tools and sort of mediums that people work in. So for instance, the oil paint, I'll put a little bit of color on this. The oil paint is going to have this like oil paint texture to it. So if you're really used to just painting, like this is a good way to emulate, brush strokes and that sort of thing, and how the light reacts to it. Light is going to react differently to pretty much every brush. But this gives you an idea as to kind of how it's looking with the oil. And as I build this up, I'm just going to put all the brushes over here. Then you have an ink brush. So that's sort of how ink looks. It has a nice sort of soft sort of texture, but also a little bit reflective, which is kind of cool. So this is also just a way to show how some of the brushes look together, but also another way of how to create. Sometimes I'll use maybe like 3 or 4 brushes throughout an entire piece, but it is possible to use numerous different brushes and building up something like that. So this is a thick paint, and you can see it has like, it's not going to have like very much volume in sort of depth, but in regards to its texture, it's going to give you a lot of different variation. It sort of like mimics like a bump map sort of thing. So this is wet paint. This gives you like a gooey sort of look to it, which kind of works. And then the different kinds of markers, I'm just going to do these ones sort of quickly side by side, give you an idea as to what they look like. So yeah, regular marker, tapered marker, and pinched marker. So this will give you the blunt sides. This has one sort of like circular side and one pinched side. And then this is like a double pinched. I tend to use the pinched marker quite a lot because it works really well with fur and that sort of thing. Then you have just a flat, which is kind of the same as the pinch marker here. They're the same sort of shapes, but They just look slightly differently. So these, the flats, they correspond with the light a lot more. You'll see some shadows and stuff there, whereas the markers don't really have much of a reflection in regards to the light. So just something to be conscious about. Just delete these for now. The highlighter and soft highlighter, these are really cool for, you know, adding a bit of transparency and a bit of depth within your creations. Like I've seen some people use these in really interesting ways to create depth or different variations of light. You'll see how it kind of reacts differently there. And then the soft highlighter, especially because it gives way more transparency. And you kind of have these sort of like soft edges or ways to highlight or accentuate different sort of things. I kind of like these actually. Yeah. Select all of these. For whatever reason, I really like that, so I'm going to put it back here. Okay, and then so that's just the first page of brushes. The second page here, there's a lot more. This is when we start getting into the animated brushes. So the light brush will emit this kind of light, not necessarily animated, but the fire is a lot different. So this is where we start getting into some movement. So that just gives you an idea as how it looks like as a really thick brush. So I really like the fire brush, like just for it to animate like that and for it to do it so simply. It's really interesting in how it works, and it takes the stretch of the brush into consideration when you're working with it. So that's how the fire brush tends to look. I'll put one back here as well. And then embers generally go quite good with the fire brush as well. So I'm just going to put some embers behind there and some embers right there. And it gives a lot more activation to your fire. And then some smoke. Let's just put some smoke on the floor here. Just make a bit of a fog sort of view. Snow, I'm not going to keep this, but I'll just put it in there. So this is what I did for the bison, sort of the bison piece. It just creates this really like slow falling snow. We have a rainbow brush. It doesn't matter what color you pick within when you do the rainbow, because it's always going to make it look like that. Stars, just a glittery kind of feeling. I use this around the edge of the with our ancestors piece to kind of give it this like kind of sparkling feel around there. Velvet ink, this is just another like basic brush. Waveform, it's another animated brush. And some of these brushes, the animated brushes are, you'll see this button down here and it says audio reactor, music visualization. So if you have a song playing from your audio player on your desktop, if it's linked to your headset, then these brushes will basically be a visualization of that music. So it's kind of a cool feature. I've used it a couple times, and it's interesting, but it's just another thing that Tilt Brush kind of implemented within the programming of this. You have the splatter brush, which is kind of an interesting sort of look like ink blot kind of stuff. Let's put it over here. And duct tape, for the sake of duct tape, let's make it gray-ish. It gives you an idea as to how it looks. And then you have paper. So I don't know how much that looks like paper, but it's just another way of like having a bit of texture. And the coarse bristles, this is what I used for the grass in the with the ancestors piece. I really like this brush. There's a really famous tilt brush artist out there, and she is always using this brush. I think it's one of the only one that she uses, but it just works. It just works for them so much more than any other brush. They're able to get a good amount of realism within their like faces and stuff like that that they make. So this tends to be a popular one for people. Dr. Wiggles is like another sort of animated bristle brush. It's kind of an interesting shape. I don't really use this one too much, but it's there. You know, some electricity, another animated brush, streamers, which is kind of cool. Hypercolor, if you want to get technicolored. I've seen this brush used quite a few times in really interesting ways. I think someone overseas made a peacock with the hypercolor brush, and it was the first time I saw it used like effectively, and very, very interesting. It was amazing. I'm going to keep this one, so put it there. Bubbles, neon pulse. It has this like light beam that goes around it. Cell vinyl is sort of like a tune shading sort of version of a brush. You got a hyper grid, which lays out this interesting, grid-like sort of thing. So it doesn't really matter like how you go, it's always gonna create this structure of sorts. Very interesting brush. I kind of like it. Then you have this light wire, so you can make like this string of wire with these like pulsing lights that come out of it, which is kind of cool. Chromatic wave, another sort of technicolored brush. You have a line of dots that you can use. So let's use this one. Petal. So this is really good for making like basic flower or grass for creation. Let's make it a little bit darker and green. Let's make some. Yeah. And icing gives a good texture to it. These three are kind of similar, but they're different in ways. So I'm just going to do all three of them side by side here. So you see the icing has a lot more texture, and then you have the tune wire, which it's a filled shape, but it has the black tune rendering on the side, and then just the straight wire. It's not going to show any sort of like reaction to the light or any outline, that sort of thing. So this one is actually good for filling in certain areas. Like if you just want color, like I use wire for some of that. So it's an easy way to fill in some, fill in some areas. You have spikes. So one end is kind of just flat. And it's like this triangular sort of brush. I tend to use this a lot for like teeth and claws for some creatures that I make. Then you have the lofted brush, which is basically a tapered end of each. It's four corners on that, kind of like an elongated cube in some ways. It's another animated brush called Disco. I'm going to do a different color here so you can see it a little better. So it's like this weird alien-like sort of brush, kind of interesting. Comet, this one's really cool. I like this. So it creates this kind of like comet hologram kind of thing. It's could also be used for fire as well. And then all of the hulls. So I'm going to put all of these next to each other as well, so you can see the difference. So at first we have a shiny hull. And the way that the hull works is like you have this held down, and no matter where you go, it's going to sort of create the overall shape based on that. You can't do like outwardly curved edges though. Like say if I wanted to make like say what looks like an ear, but then come back like that, it's not going to do that. So it's going to take the whole shape into consideration. So I can't go back up here like that and have this portion cut out, because I brought this all the way down there. It's always going to link where I first started holding down the controller. So that's just something to keep in consideration there. So I'll just make a shiny hull here so you can really see, the light. And then right next to it, I'm going to put the matte hull so you can still react to the light. Unlit hull is not going to react to the light at all. And then a diamond is going to give this like transparency here. I'm going to move all of these over here so you can kind of see it a bit better. Okay, so this is the difference between these, and just do the diamond again so you can get a better idea as to the transparency that it kind of gives. So it really depends on how you would like your object or whatever, how you'd like it reactive to the light. If you do want to have shadows taken into consideration, then these are the first two ones. The shiny hull and the matte hull are some of the best ones to use. I use matte hull a lot for my work. I just really like the way that the light bounces off it, how reactive it is to shadow and that kind of thing, and it has this realism to it that I really enjoy. Very rarely do I use the diamond hull, but it is effective, and the shiny hull is pretty nice too. So that's it for the tools that, or the brushes that are given to you within Tilt Brush just as is. Move these back here. Might as well keep those. And just by this creation here, I didn't know how this was going to come up. I kind of like it. I wish this was like a real thing that I can say that I did and be proud of. So when you increase the scale, so this gives you a bit of an idea as to like how this would look like if it was an actual physical sculpture in the real world, based on just making your size a lot smaller. And then to contrast that, we'll bring the size down, and you can just kind of look around it. And at this point, it's like, okay, well, I did all of this work. I want to save it. So you just go to your save icon. It's going to bring up a little thumbnail loader here. So you press trigger to capture save icon. So just going to press it. It's going to go add to sketchbook. So now this piece is saved. And to bring back the dropper, so you did all this work and it's like, oh, but I forget what this brush is here. So you're just going to go to your dropper and just hover over it. It's like, oh, that's the pinch flat. Cool. Oh, that's dots. That is pinched flat, oil paint, ink, dots, marker, pedal. It's a really good reference. That's why the dropper is kind of a powerful tool in that sort of regard. You're able to go back and just really get an idea as to how you did things and what you used. Splatter, soft highlighter. Cool. Okay. So that is a pretty good overview as to all of the tools and the workspace. What time are we at here? 25. Do you want to take, should we take like 5-10 minutes, Tristan?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, cool.
Give you a bit of a break from the metaverse.
Yeah. I am going to, okay, so I have this saved. I'm just going to put my headset to sleep. So it's going to disconnect from the stream that's coming out of my headset.
Cool.
But I just want to give you a heads up. So I'm just going to do that now. There we go. Just gonna stop share for now. Cool.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you've been going for a while, so why don't we take maybe 15? We can meet back at 4 o'clock.
Cool. Yep.
Yeah,
Sounds
good
perfect.
to you. Awesome.
Yeah.
And Winona, if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat or bring on with now. Up to you.
Excellent. All right. I'll see you guys in a bit.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Feeling rested? Ready to go?
Yeah. Um, okay, so I've gone over pretty much everything that I had within my outline. I think for the rest of the time, I'll just go over some considerations for optimization, preparing something to get ready for exporting, because the whole exporting procedures is different based on what headset you're using or how you're using it. I'll give just a basic overview, but just to let you guys know, it is going to be different for, let's say, if you're using a Vive headset, or if you're on a Quest or Quest 2, if you're using a link cable or AirLink or not at all. Basically, when I guess I'll have to cover the exporting when I'm in the headset. But is there any sort of like questions now that anyone has? I don't imagine there'd be too many, if at all. But I just like to ask if there's any sort of question or anything specifically that has come to mind for people so far. If not, then I'll just jump right back into it.
And Casey, I was just going to say, just given that most people are viewing from recording, if this section ends up wrapping up a little early, that's totally cool.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I might not need another full hour just to go over all of this. So,
yeah, I figured.
I'll jump right back in and cover some stuff for optimization. So again, throw on the face napkin. Okay, AirLink launch. Okay. All right. So we'll just go back to my sketch. So for instance, I just loaded up. I quit tilt brush and then loaded it up again. So when you open it up, it'll automatically go to the featured sketches. But if you go to your sketches, you can access your sketch right from there. Or if you want to start something new, you just click on new sketches. I'm going to go back to our original sketch here. And just like the beginning, if you just wanted to let it do its thing, and so you can kind of see the progress you made within your piece and how you did it. You could just let it play through again, which I'm just going to do because it was kind of interesting. And it does it all at a really fast rate. So if it was something that was kind of straightforward, then it's going to load fairly quickly. Okay, so optimization. So when I originally started working in tilt brush, and I was making those pieces like the Phoenix Kraken and the Raven, when I was creating those, I didn't take into consideration, or I didn't even think that those creations were going to exist anywhere else, until it got to the point where I wanted to bring my Ravens piece into Unity. And what I realized was that how I made that piece, like there were so many different marks. Like there weren't too many times where I was just holding the brush down and creating like a big area just with one stroke. There were a bunch of individual strokes. And what that does is when you see these creations in another 3D software, they aren't necessarily going to react exactly the same as they do in Tilt Brush. There's things called SDKs, which are used for some software. Like, for instance, Unity has an Tilt Brush SDK where you can import creations from Tilt Brush. And with the SDK, it's going to make Unity understand what the brushes look like. I'm sure there's a SDK for Unreal Engine as well. But for instance, some of the brushes might not come out exactly as they would in Tilt Brush. Mostly the animated brushes, because that's a whole other sort of thing that the engine has to take into consideration. So for instance, the fire, the embers, the snow, the comet, they might not appear as they would in Tilt Brush, whereas some of the more basic brushes like these marks, they might come out a lot better. So that's just something to take into consideration if you're planning to have your creation exist somewhere else. It's these building blocks that you need to sort of install, or these add-ons or SDKs that you need to install in order to make them work a little bit more. If I was to export this just straight as is, as let's say an FBX, which is kind of like a universal 3D software format, a lot of these might come up as just like flat shaded marks or objects, that sort of thing. So that's just something to take into consideration, a bit of a heads up. In regards to optimization specifically, one of the best ways that I can describe it is with the hulls. So if I were to make, let's say, do my best at doing just a basic flat cube. Okay, so automatically, this isn't a perfect cube, you know, and because there's these minor imperfections, you know, on this side, so this isn't going to export just as like a single plane. You have these different marks and imperfections within the side. So all of these different edges here, as you can see in that, all of these are going to be different splines and control points that are connecting this entire shape. So if you want a really smooth side, let's say, to this cube, instead of doing it just by freehand, because every little instance, say here, I wanted this to go just straight up, but I went subtly backwards a little bit, and it's creating these extra polygons that you may not necessarily want within your creation. So if you'd like this cube to be more optimized, then a good idea for that is to bring up the guide and make an actual more of a cube shape with the guide. Now, the thing about this is that it won't let you do the cube in just one sitting. You'll have to do these sides all separately. But regardless, you're making a cube that has a lot less information in it, so that when you prepare to bring this out of the program, then it's not going to be as processor heavy on the engine or whatever you're using, whether it be Blender, Cinema 4D, Unreal, or Unity. Go like this, close that off. Okay, so that's all the edges. I'm going to remove the guide. I'll just delete that for now. And so already, in comparison to this cube here, It's a lot more smooth. However, right now, these are all different pieces. Like say, if I were to select these three and move them, then it's not going to be joined, right? So I'm just going to undo to put that back. And I'm going to select all of these. So all of the edges of this cube. And then I'm going to group them. Okay, so that's grouped. So now when I go to select this, it's a lot easier to manage. And I believe when you export that this is going to export as its own group, whereas this would export as a single sort of brush mark. So this is, it's the most basic way that I can describe and explain optimization for your work. Say for the instance of when I was making raven gods or any sort of bird-like shape, to go back and make it look like those feathers were more part of like a single mark. Maybe not doing a series and a whole bunch of just single marks, but like maybe holding the brush down and creating a bunch of feathers at the same time. So maybe, so use a pinched flat. Yeah, it's pinched flat. So one thing that I should have done for Raven Gods is making marks like this, like doing the feathers like that, and just holding down the trigger, as opposed to doing a bunch of singular marks, so that this way, this way it's a lot easier to manage, because these are all, it's all just one mark, and that's how Tilt Brush is kind of taking it into consideration and programming it. So that's kind of a stage, another stage of optimization, and it's a lot more easy to control this as well, as opposed to if all of these were its own single mark, there would be upwards of, let's say, approximately like 50 marks within here. So having these all just be one mark is a lot less programming for the software, and a lot less programming for the other software that you'd be using. So just a heads up for that. Might as well keep these, our little optimization cubes. I'm really liking this little arrangement. I don't know, I never create like this, but it gives a good good example of all the different brushes just within one single area. Okay, so now time for exporting. And I'll just say that, oh, perfect timing. My Quest battery is getting low, even though it was fully charged. Okay, so this is going to be different for everyone because of you know, the headset you're using, or if you're on a tethered connection or not. But because I'm using AirLink, which is basically using an Oculus Link cable from your headset to your computer, this is kind of how it reacts. So to export your work, make sure you save it. Let's just save this again. And you don't need to take a picture of it again. If you save it again, it uses the same sort of information. It just says save. So because you can't use that anymore, you go to more options, and then you open up labs. I guess within the more options, you have your settings as well. Maybe should have mentioned this at the beginning. But brush tip angle is something that is it's all about your preference. So right now, my brush tip angle is at like all the way to the left, which means that the indicator and the arrow is going pretty much straight out from the controller. However, you can tilt this down. Let's bring it all the way to the right. And now the pointer is, it's going straight down from from the controller as well. And that's just a difference in if you want to make your marks like this or like this. It's really just your own preference. So I like when the brush tip goes straight out like that. And then you can also adjust the visual quality for the performance of your desktop. If you don't want your desktop to really be powered up, you can bring this slider down. You'll also have the stroke simplification. So it tried to make these as smooth as possible for me. But if you don't want there to be any sort of compensation with the marks you're making and that sort of thing, you can slide this all the way to the left. And it's not going to simplify anything that you do. You're going to have really technical marks. But I like my marks to be somewhat smooth, so I have this all to the right. But within your labs here, you press that. Let's bring this forward. So there's a couple things here. Tilt Brush enables you to stream right to Twitch. You can also stream right to YouTube as well. This is just a game that you have in here. The local media library is where you would upload all of your pictures and models to be used within your creation. So I have some 3D models here that I've downloaded from the internet that I use kind of as references and that sort of thing. So there's a crow here. So let's load this up. And you can bring models right into your world to use as a reference or just to use as is. However, because they're reference objects, you're not able to color these at all. You're not able to change its design or anything like that. It makes it kind of just as a reference. But what these are good for, and what I've done before in the past, is you import a just basic OBJ object, and then you can go in and use this as a reference. So if I wanted to kind of like use the shape of its head and its beak to kind of like rough in the shape of this. This probably isn't going to look very good at all, but just as an idea, you can make like more gestured kind of creations. Do a bit more up here. Okay, so then say if we just got rid of the object, you can kind of have you get a sort of an idea. So it really helps to get depth and form within VR, because that's one of the first things that you might have difficulty with is the depth of your creations and how far your hand is going in and back. It can be difficult to do something on a very flat surface sometimes. So having those reference models really helps. That just gives you an idea as to how to use those. And then your local images. These are some reference images I was using for another project. But I loaded this one up yesterday because I just wanted to put an image in here and to show you how to load up reference images. So there'll be a local images folder within your computer or your headset. I believe you can upload images right to your headset through the Quest. Don't quote me on that, but you can also just hook up your headset to your computer with the cable that's provided for your Quest 2, and you're able to load up images like that. So once you have an image in your folder, you could just click on it. It'll bring it right into your world. You can grab it and also scale it up as well. Like you can make your reference images massive. Like you can make them huge, which is kind of cool. Sometimes I'll bring in a bunch of different reference images of various things. Let's say if I was doing a dog, I'd bring in a reference images of its like straightforward, also a side profile, and then like a side profile of its body, so that I have enough information that I can kind of create my own character based on those reference images. And it really helps to just get your accuracy for certain things. So the same sort of concept applies if this was a PNG, let's say, that had the background removed, then it would just be the dog itself, and then the rest of the image would just be transparent. So that's a way of using images, reference images, and images that you create, and to bring them into Tiltbrush as well. So that gives you an idea as to how to do that. So that's the reference library. Then you also have a spectator camera that I believe the Twitch and the YouTube chat thing are linked to. But here's your export sort of function. You just press that. It's going to say untitled or whatever you named it. It's going to say that it's exported, and then within a file on in the folder, the Tiltbrush folder, whether you access it on your computer when you plug it in with the cable, then you're going to be able to grab that file and move it wherever you want. I believe it exports in a few different formats, but one of the formats that it exports is in FBX. And as I mentioned before, FBX is like the universal kind of format for a lot of 3D software and that sort of thing. So you're able to take that file and do whatever you want from it from that point. If you're going to be going into Unity, just make sure you have the Tiltbrush SDK ready, and then a lot of your brushes are going to look more similar than as to what they do in Tiltbrush. So yeah, that's a basic overview, and that is kind of the workshop. I'll keep on going off center. Is there any sort of questions whatsoever? If not, I suppose we could just wrap up then.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Casey. This was really great, super
Cool.
informative, and I love this like abstract amalgamation you've made here at the end. You know,
Yeah.
as much as it was a playing ground, it feels like a piece on its own.
Totally. Yeah. I think I might try and do something with it, even if it's just like, hey, look at this thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if there are no other questions, I can stop recording at this moment, and we can wrap up a bit early. But yeah, just thank you again. This was awesome. I hope everyone who's listening in off the recording had a great time following along as well.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tristan. Thank you, Interaccess, and yeah, everyone else that's kind of contributed to, you know, my career. VR was something that I didn't really expect that I'd get into, and I'm just glad that I gave it a shot, because one of the things that I've learned throughout my career in trying different mediums and that sort of thing is you never really know what you're going to be good at. And what it can do for you for your career as well. So if you've been thinking about getting into VR art, or curious about it even, then I definitely recommend just jumping in and seeing what you can do.
That's awesome. I hope somebody finds inspiration from that.
Cool.
Awesome. I'm going to stop recording at this moment. So thank you everybody for tuning in.